Hello. So we have an 11 o'clock advisory, and there's been a couple of changes. They are some small adjustments, and I just want you guys to be aware of them. We're looking at a little bit of a shift here. Now, I'm not going to be convinced that everything is going to change or anything has really changed, but there are a couple of key things that I want you guys to see. First thing I want you to see, wind speeds are back up. So the maximum sustained wind now 160, that puts it back as a Category 5 hurricane. So keep that in mind, a little bit stronger now. Motion is still to the west, this time at 13 miles per hour. So none of that has changed. It actually made a second landfall now on the coastline of Cuba. You know, we looked at satellite images. There it is, kind of brushing the shore. So the center crossed over. There's a second landfall. There it is. I was thinking that the interaction with the mountains, the land, that may have helped to slow it down. The winds were a little weaker earlier today, but now the winds are back up, which is a little bit of a surprise. But as I said before, nothing really is predictable about hurricanes. So the general trend in the motion should continue. We're still expecting the same west-northwest motion. We think still it's going to kind of head toward the Keys, and then after that it pushes toward the peninsula of Florida. Okay, one more change. Okay, first change is the wind speed. Wind speeds are back up to a Category 5. Where is... Here I am. Category 5, 160 mile per hour winds. Back to a Category 5. A second thing I want to point out is hurricane warnings all the way up. And now we have a hurricane watch. And that does include our area. So all the way up through the Apalachicola area around the Bend, and then also along the northeast coast of Florida. Let's see, I'm going to get the specifics here. Let's see exactly. They'll give us the cities here, so let's be correct. And you know, when I tell you where these watches and warnings are, I want to make sure that I'm giving you really accurate information. So that storm hurricane warning has been extended north. Oh, yeah. So the hurricane warning now extended north on the east coast. That'll go to the Volusia-Brevard County line. That's up on the east coast of the state of Florida. On the west coast, it actually goes up to Anclote Key. So a little bit farther north for the hurricane warning. We, again, now have a hurricane watch. That's extended north on the east coast. It goes to Fernandina Beach. On the west coast to Indian Pass. And on the east coast, it goes to, I'm saying this wrong, aren't I? On the east coast to Fernandina Beach, and on the west coast all the way to Indian Pass. So we've had an extension of what we had seen some time ago, and most of this is just kind of migrating to the north. So a little stronger wind and an extension of the watches and the warnings. Warnings are up the east and the west coast. The watches, these are hurricane watches. And what a warning means is those conditions in 36 hours. What a watch means, this thing is not going away. The watch means these conditions, hurricane conditions, likely, possible. Warning, likely, possible in 46 hours. So, yeah, it does include our coastline. And so that's the area that we're looking at this point. Little stronger wind. If I put the track line on, you might notice a little bit of a nudge to the west. You know, as we have been talking about, nudges, you know, east and west are typical until it really starts a more steady approach. So I'm not surprised by any of this. The overall motion should remain the same, though. I don't think any of that's going to change. Let's flip through the rest of the stuff because loaded up a few things and we're going to change some things. So let's go this way. All right, now he didn't, on this version, he didn't update all the watches and warnings because as I said before, the watches were, you know, now in this area all the way around the Bend to here, and now these are all warned areas, both up the east and also up the west coast, and then north to the state line, and then west to Indian Pass. That's where we also have the hurricane watches in effect. So this has been updated. So that has been modified just a little bit. Okay, this is the storm surge inundation. So some of you have been asking kind of how high is the water going to get? Storm surge is the height. It's going to affect Maureen, the Naples area. I don't know that it's going to hit or make landfall in there, but somewhere in that general vicinity. So here's what we're looking at. The highest storm surge should be in the southeastern side of the peninsula. 5 to 10 foot surge. 3 to 6 feet above that or north of that, and also on the back side, And of course, this is the dangerous side because this is where the approach happens quickly. So as it pushes forward, we're looking at 8 to 12 feet. So southern end of Florida is the greatest storm surge. 3 to 6 up the eastern coast of the state of Florida, and then 5 to 8 and a little bit less as you go higher than that. Of course, everything out in the Bahamas, it's just, it's crazy over there. It's a madhouse. This is a different satellite image, and the reason I'm showing you this, the scope, there's the dimension. We're talking about nearly a 400-mile wide hurricane. So as it hits the state of Florida, and I think this vantage point really showcases it pretty well, it's heading up toward the west-northwest. It's going to cover both coasts, east and west, as it moves up the peninsula. So if you think that you're going to escape by going to one side or the other, you won't. Everybody's going to get it. And the only hope is that as it sits across the land for at least some amount of time, the winds start to decrease. And then, of course, it starts to dry out some because it'll start pulling in some slightly drier air, but there's still a lot of moisture coming in off the Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico. So here's the motion of it. There's the center. Now, if you watch it carefully, you can actually see how it kind of crosses over. So this is the second landfall. The second landfall is, because remember, it crossed over in the islands, but there it is now kind of crossing over Cuba. So they have declared the second landfall as a Category 5 hurricane. Again, winds are back up to 160. Motion is still this general westerly direction right now. We're kind of waiting for the lift and then the turn. And then again, it approaches the peninsula of Florida. So our last graphic, this is the rainfall amount. So they actually have the totals here as opposed to, the key on the opposite side. So this may be a little bit easier to look at, as a quick glance kind of thing. Least amount of rain in the panhandle. Here, maybe amounts of, 1 to possibly as high as 3 inches. Start to see the yellow, you're looking at least a 3 to 5 inch tally. There's your color key for that. Now there can be some isolated amounts that are higher. And you might be asking why, because sometimes you get thunderstorms. And thunderstorms will give you more rain than a steady rain that you might get with just the whole circulation of the hurricane. Of course, the rainfall totals are going to be excessive and incredibly high, from the lower end of the peninsula all the way up to northeast Florida. So at the top end here, we are seeing the fuchsia. A good 12 to 18 inches possible. 12 to 18 inches of rain. There's some smaller areas that may see a little bit higher than that. Maybe, a 1.5 feet of rain is when you think about it, what it will tally up to be. So as we approach the West Palm area and the areas north, you've got the red coloring here. This would include Tampa and the Orlando area and possibly even up the East Coast as far north as Jacksonville, Palm Coast, all the cities that you guys really know well. So let's say from Naples across to West Palm up to Jacksonville and then basically down to the Tampa area. This area is looking at a good 8 to 12 inches of rain. So maybe nearly a foot. Hopefully for far less than that, but we can't anticipate any of that. And then lesser amounts as you head northwest. So the orange 5 to 8, the yellow 3 to 5, and lesser as you head to the panhandle. So this is what we're looking at. And this, notice this is through Tuesday. So this is the whole duration. So a couple things to keep in mind. One is, that hovering hurricane called Harvey that just almost sat in a stationary pattern really produced all that rain because of that. This one's moving. So there's cautious optimism here in the fact that it continues to move. We're not looking at any of that to change. The thing that has changed is the winds are back up. And quite frankly, that is just a little bit of a surprise. I was kind of hoping that it would keep going on the decrease as opposed to the increase, but hope and what really happens in reality are two different things. So we're back up to a Category 5 hurricane, the west motion at 13. It's pretty similar to what it did in the last two advisories. We still think it's going to roll up the spine here, cross over the Keys, push ashore. The area, of course, would be, and you can pick it out on these kinds of maps, but you're looking at somewhere between Key West and Naples. Can't really pinpoint. Could be Everglades City, could be Cape Romano, but that's the general vicinity now that we're looking at. The other side of it is, once it pushes, everything's coming in from the south on the right-hand side of its direction of motion. So when you saw the excessive rainfall amounts and the really high storm surge, it makes sense. That's the center. It makes sense that everything pushes ashore. So be aware of that. I hope everybody is off the coastline. The mandatory evacuations and have been carried out. There's a little bit of time. So if you haven't thought about it and you are in an area where there's mandatory evacuation, please leave. There's honestly no sense in staying, and there's nobody to help you if, in fact, you decide you want to stay. So, honestly, just get out. So it moves up. We still keep getting mostly the entire peninsula now. We're looking at that, onshore flow along the entire East Coast. It moves up. Now it looks like, based on this, that it hovers a little more toward the coastline. Now that may or may not, but it means on the right-hand side of direction of motion is pretty much the entire peninsula. I am still expecting a little bit of a nudge either to the right, which is to the east, or to the left, and a lot of times I have seen them nudge east just before they're approaching land areas. So we would love for it to turn. I don't think we're going to see a dramatic turn at this point. It is absolutely impacting us. This is really the highest it can get. It's a Category 5 hurricane. It can't get higher than that category. The wind speeds could go up, but it's real close to land now. So, anything can happen. It's a real warm pocket of water here. I don't want to say it won't. There's some land nearby, but, we just saw interaction with land, and sure enough, it went back to a Category 5 hurricane. Chance of it staying west and getting into the Gulf, Alex, anything can happen. I'm not dismissing a thing at this point because this thing is doing absolutely whatever it wants to do. I sure hope that won't happen. It can happen, but I sure hope it won't happen because there's a real warm loop current in this pocket of the Gulf of Mexico. And I have seen historically some hurricanes kind of blow up here, which means they really rapidly intensify. We're looking at everything across the state, Gigi. The Lakeland area, you've got wind and I'll go through these really quickly again in case you missed them. So the warnings are up now to the areas that you did see previously into the watch. They've extended them north. So look at these areas now. This has got the update of the hurricane watch areas, so a little farther north. And we also have now a hurricane watch all the way up. And this goes to the state line on the east coast of Florida. And then on the west coast as well. And it goes to Indian Pass. So it includes our coastline all the way down. That includes all you guys in Taylor County, all the way down here and through the Big Bend. That includes the coastlines of Wakulla, Gulf, Franklin County. You guys are all, the coastline is under the hurricane watch. So that's been extended. Now the inland locations, it may or may not be a little bit different. The winds there are going to start to pick up. And did I lose it? No. Okay. So the coastline, not only are the watches and warnings posted, there are the estimations of the storm surge. The Panhandle is, honestly, Melissa, it's in the best shape. That's where the least impact is going to be. I'm not going to say no impact, but fortunately, if it stays well to your east, as right now it looks like, because, again, there's the path, so the rotation is like this. So the Panhandle gets all offshore wind. Storm surge, minimal. Rainfall amounts, minimal. And honestly, right now, you guys are in really good shape. But keep watching just in case anything changes, and that's the problem here. I wish we had higher confidence and higher accuracy with hurricanes. It's the thing that's going to impact the greatest number of residents in the longest period of time. We're doing our best. We're just not that great. And the problem is it's developing over water. And you don't have all of the data, all the reports that we get over land areas with all the Weather Service offices and all of these reporting sites and those, weather stations that you guys see everywhere. And so we rely on these planes. We can get a few of them crisscrossing at different heights, and we do a good job at measuring and extrapolating down, but we don't know everything. And we don't know the environment as well as we'd like. So they can hit an environment where we might think that there could be a collapse. And it's the opposite. And candidly, I'm going to tell you, I was really hoping that the decrease in wind I saw earlier would continue. And that didn't happen this advisory. I'm a little bit surprised by that. But, it's still here. And part of it is still going to be moving across some rugged terrain here on the north side, the spine here of Cuba. So, again, I'm still kind of hoping that maybe there's a little bit of a drying impact and a little bit of friction that takes place here. But it will keep moving. Notice there's far less of a cone. That's that white area on either side of the center. So what that means is, pretty good confidence it's going to be here. And we're pretty sure it's going to be within the cone, but a little bit more confident that it's going to be within this area. This is that skinny black line that the Hurricane Center doesn't really like because people tend to focus on it because it could be within any area here, but we're ready for that. So let's say it moves here and it's within the cone. The farthest east on the cone, it's still at the southern tip of Florida. The farthest west, and this is, I think, Alex, what you were talking about, puts it in the Gulf of Mexico. And honestly, that could be really, really dangerous. So we're going to hope that the overall motion, where it at least partly stays across the peninsula and interacts with some land, kind of helps us a bit. Let's see, the time frame for our area. Now, I did have that too. Okay. So, here we go. The time of experience for the tropical storm force winds hasn't really changed. They've got this at, this is Sunday at 8 p.m., so this is the earliest arrival of tropical storm force winds, and a little bit to our southeast, expected by, probably late afternoon. I don't know that that's really changed. Here is Monday at 8 o'clock. Now, we were thinking that it would have been probably late Sunday afternoon that we might start to see. The circulation still down here, but remember how big it is? So if it covers one of these boxes and the center moves up, let's say around the Bay Area here, we're going to start to see something. We'll get some clouds and some rain. All of that starts impinging on the coast and then rotating. So we're going to start to see rain moving in from the southeast and then pushing out to the northwest. That's how it moves in. And that really is because of that big circulation, kind of as it approaches our area. But yeah, now that the watch has been extended, those conditions are possible within 48 hours. But, we're all doing a really good job at trying to make sure that, we've got our supplies, we've got our preparations all handled. The timing is going to keep swapping, and I don't want you guys to get nervous about any of this, and it's not like I'm dismissing all of this and saying it's going away. I think, though, that the timing is going to vary because each of the runs, they're taking different information into effect, and because this is kind of slow moving across the Cuba area, we're going to have to slow down its approach into Florida. So now they've got the center here, kind of sitting on top of the Keys. This is Sunday morning, but remember, it's big. And even though the center is here, all that cloud, all the winds in the tropical storm force area, probably covering the lower half of the state. And I think as we look at this, which I don't have so this easy, here we are, it's about the right timing, right? Because we said Sunday morning it's down here, right? Here's the state of Florida. I know it's hard to see when you have all the colors here, but here's Sunday morning, and the center's about here. That's about right. That's about 200 miles away. So that's the leading edge. But again, please remember, this is the earliest reasonable arrival time. It's experimental. Hurricane Center just started issuing these this year for the first time. I kind of like them. I think people like to know the time frame. We get an estimate, and it's an estimate to the best of their ability. Don't be surprised if it's slightly earlier or later, but all of that is going to depend on that motion. So let me show you a couple of things here's new stuff. Here's radar. Remember, radar showing you where it's rained. Some of this is not real rain. There's a little bit of ground clutter here, but you can see on the east coast of Florida. Now, these are real far outer bands, but, almost to the extent that it's pulling in that tropical air. So you're up in the Palm Coast area, you're seeing some rain. It's not the hurricane. It's just some of that moisture that's kind of streaming around that big circulation. But there's a pretty good stretch of it. So if it sits across the same area, you guys, and this is well in advance of the hurricane, around this Palm Coast area, you guys are going to be seeing some good rainfall totals. Now, this is just north of Daytona Beach and probably really between Daytona Beach and Palm Coast. So there's a lot of rain that's moving in right now. And, you got a few thunderstorms there as well. Additionally, to the south, you've got a little bit more in the way of rain. Here's Melbourne. So you're north of there, east of Orlando, kind of moving just to the southeast of the Orlando area. Here's Fort Pierce. So that's what's happening right now. Here's, wait, 1, 2, oh, I knew I had 2 radars. Okay, so here's the other one. Again, this is not real rain. That's what we call ground clutter, so it's a false return. Don't pay attention to that. That's not real rain. Here's some of that rain that you were seeing. It's just to the south now, because here's Fort Pierce, right? Here's Lake Okeechobee. So you get a little bit of almost a training effect. It's moving across the same path, so some rain kind of in this area, all around the big circulation of Irma. But this is really more closely related. These are the outer bands. These are the feeder bands. These are the spiraling bands, whatever you want to call them. But this is where you're going to get rain, maybe a few gusts of wind, and then you'll get the breaks. So here's one band, here's another band, and again, notice the rotation. So they're pushing down to the southwest. Coming in from the northeast, pushing down to the southwest. That, of course, counterclockwise rotation. Grady County, southwest Georgia, you probably get some rain, you probably get some wind. It kind of depends on how the path is at this point. You're talking in this area, so by this point, and they're still doing the same as they did at 5 o'clock, which, I'm cautiously optimistic about very few things, but I'm trying to find something here. They still have it making landfall as a major hurricane, right? The M suggests it's a major hurricane. That means 111 or higher, and we're seeing higher. So let's assume it's a Category 4, maybe a 3, but let's assume at least a Category 4 hurricane. It hits the eastern side, the eastern half over land, a little dry air, a little bit of friction, and they still keep the S here by 8 o'clock Monday night, which means now as it approaches South Georgia Monday night, you've got a tropical storm. So they do show the continued weakening. They have, don't have the midpoint here, so let's extrapolate. We're 8 a.m. Monday morning. That kind of puts the center here along the coast. Maybe it's the Tarpon Springs area. If it's still a hurricane, could be looking at a big fetch of water, a lot of storm surge, a lot of coastal flooding. Basically from Tampa Bay on southward, offshore in our hurricane watch area across the bend and all the way down. Really, it covers the entire Big Bend and all the way over to the west to Indian Pass. So unfortunately, at that point, it's all offshore. But then as it moves to southwest Georgia, let's assume it's going to impact the extreme corners. You've got Decatur, Grady, and Thomas counties being impacted. You got a little bit of wind and some rain. But at this point on the backside, and this would be, and you guys have to pay attention now, we're talking about Taylor County, the coastal areas of, maybe even parts of Jefferson County, but St. Mark's down. You're going to now have an onshore flow. That really is going to increase the storm surge. And of course, it will give a little bit more in the way of flooding. So same thing is true. If, run from the water, hide from the wind. If you're on the coast, and especially if you're in the hurricane watch area, you need to evacuate. No reason to stay. If you're in a mobile home, you need to evacuate. Again, no reason to stay. Jacksonville is still going to get winds. There is no doubt about it. There is a wind thing here. Here's the probability of at least tropical storm force winds, and the highest probabilities are in those deeper shades, the red and the purple kind of thing. That's going to happen. So they're going to get the winds. The timing is where there's a little bit of an uncertainty. And where was the timing map? I'm tired. I know you guys are too. All right, let's go to it. You know what? This will be a little bit, it's their experimental version, but you know what? Let's show it to you. So here it is. Look at the tilt, basically from Jacksonville to Apalachicola. Let's call it that. We'll go ahead and assume it's a straight line because of the way it's moving in, almost from a southeasterly direction and then pushing up to the northwest. So this is the earliest reasonable arrival time of tropical storm force winds. So this is Sunday night. Give or take a couple of hours. If it stays as the latest run shows it, which is really kind of hovering along the west coast of Florida, on the outer edge, it's more of a tropical storm force. It's got to be closer to the center to really experience the hurricane force. But this thing is so big, and we're covering 100 miles of these hurricane force winds. So it really is something in that sense that we have to be concerned about. I need to get rid of the advisory. Let me go back to the track here. I want to make sure I have that up so you guys can see that. So we'll put that in a new tab. How did I do? Here we are. Okay. And there it is. So this is the path, right? Stays here. You've got hurricane force winds on either side, maybe 50 to 60 miles east and west. Outside that, it's tropical storm force winds. So if you're along the East Coast, and that, yes, includes you in Jacksonville, the farther west, the better it is for you. That's the farther west. Now, the farther west, the worse it is for us. We're in this area. We're on the left side, which is the slightly weaker side of a hurricane. At the coast, it does help because it pushes everything offshore. But again, we now have that hurricane watch in effect from Indian Pass on around the Big Bend. So basically our coastline there on over. And so initially, yes, offshore, but once it lifts into South Georgia, then everything starts to push in the opposite direction, and that'll give a really high tide. It'll give a high storm surge. I don't really know what the time of the tides are, but I do want to remind everybody that along the west coast of Florida, the Gulf Coast hurricanes create it's a greater storm surge. The height is higher along the Gulf Coast simply because the continental shelf is a little bit more shallow. So there's no really room for the water to go. So what it ends up doing is kind of pushing onshore. On the East Coast, on the other hand, the shelf is deeper. There's a little bit more flexibility with the height here, so we can push the water out a little bit. And so the surge isn't quite as high along the East Coast as on the Atlantic coast as it is along the Gulf Coast. So that's a little bit dangerous there. Where you got the bays, that water's piling up. There's really no room. So, think of a swamp as filling in. And, all of these things are not really good for us. So let's see what's going on. These are updating. I have them set on an automatic update so we get to see the rain in real time. So here's South Florida. This is the area of first impact. Not quite raining yet in the Keys. Not quite raining yet on the southeast coast of the peninsula. This is not real rain. Ground clutter. A little high humidity. There's tropical air in place, as most of you already know. There are the Keys. You guys know these places pretty well, and I'm sure you have family and friends that you're in contact with. You got Naples over here. Here's Everglades City. Right now, it would appear that the center moves across the Keys, and then it starts to make its approach toward the peninsula in this general vicinity. And so with that, and that counterclockwise turn, you've got everything pushing ashore. So you're starting to see the early arrival of some of these bands. You got the rain, you got the stronger thunderstorms. It's all pushing ashore. And as long as it stays to our south, you're not seeing it approach. But once the hurricane lifts off Cuba and then starts moving more northwest, that's when it gets closer to the coastline. So we're still a few hours away from seeing the bands approach, not the tropical storm force winds, maybe a little wind gust embedded within some of these thunderstorms. But, this is the outer periphery. This is the early arrival of, what's to come, and that would be, of course, down the road. So that's the most southern radar. If we scoot up the East Coast a little bit, you'll also see a little bit more rain. Now, it's really just the big fetch of air. That big counterclockwise turning, you get a lot of tropical air coming in off the Atlantic. So between Palm Coast, between Daytona Beach, it's almost a little training effect, but we've got rain moving across the same, there was your update. How do you like that? You got to see it live and up close. It's moving across the same path, so there may be some heavy accumulations, maybe a couple of inches, and this is before the arrival of the hurricane. Also seeing some rain between Orlando and the coast, and this, of course, I guess this is the Brevard County area. The Volusia County area is seeing some rain in that vicinity. And just north of Lake Okeechobee. Looks like it's trying to scoot all the way over to Fort Myers. I don't know that it'll make it. Some of it may dry out, but not real rain, 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 rain. So the leading edge, that's what this is. This is the leading edge of, what's to come at this point. Well, look at that. There's our track. All right, so here we are. Here's what we've got. Let's see if they've updated it. I don't know that he has. There's your storm surge. Here's that, and that's the forecast. All right, so he doesn't have it. Let's see if on his page. This is that Spaghetti Models, for those of you wanting to know what some of these good sites are. Okay. Yes, we want to proceed. All right, this is spaghettimodels.com. And he does really a good job. It's just that, like everybody else, some of these websites are really loaded down. So they've kind of taken a little bit longer to load. But things that we're noticing, winds are back up to 160. We got a Category 5 again. West at 13, that was what it was doing the last advisory. Warnings are up a little bit farther north on the East Coast. Warnings are up a little bit farther north on the West Coast. And north of those red areas, which are the hurricane warnings, meaning conditions probable within 36 hours, you've got hurricane watches. So all the way up to the state line on the East Coast and all the way through the Indian Pass area. That includes our area, all the way around the bend, and right there to this region. So we've got a large area. Oops, you can't even see it. Large area under hurricane watch, and a pretty large area that's going to be experiencing the storm graphics, hurricane warning, and that honestly, it's just this is what we're watching, and I'm just losing kind of everything at this point. So that's the latest. What we did notice is a little bit of a nudge to the west. Don't be surprised if it keeps going back and forth, and it seems like they can't make up their mind. They're trying to do their best. They will adjust a little bit. Trying to take everything into consideration. A lot of confidence, a lot of validity in the short term. This is 24, 36 hours out. Now we're looking at Monday. Today's Friday night. When you think about it, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, that's almost 3 days away. So we lose a little bit of accuracy, a bigger spread. So it could be on the far left side of this white cone. It could be on the far right side or the left side. Probably less of that extreme wiggle, but anything is possible. So don't be so concerned when you see a small nudge. Expect slight adjustments as we continue to see some of these other advisories as they come out. I don't know that I've helped you guys. Again, I'm just trying to do my very best to make sure that we're all informed. It's starting to get a little nerve-wracking because we're kind of getting down to crunch time. Still got time tomorrow. Tomorrow you guys can still get out. Outside stuff, everything in, everything's secure. Don't let it blow around. I'll chat with you guys then as well. We'll probably have a good part of Sunday now as well because it's going to take a little more time for it to head up the peninsula. But we're still watching. So I think if you are of the belief that this is something that could help, a little prayer would be helpful for all of us. But we'll see what happens in the overnight hours and really just at this point hope and pray for the best. So I'll talk to you then. Bye.